My warm greetings to everyone here. And first of all, I would like to thank ARIJ for giving me the honor of joining you here today. It has been extremely moving and humbling to watch and listen to the words of journalists who are literally putting their lives on their line so that you and I and the rest of the world can hear what is happening in Gaza. Without journalists on the ground, local journalists on the ground, because Israel, of course, does not allow international journalists to access Gaza, without those brave local journalists, the world would not know the truth. And when we honor journalists, we actually honor not just them, but their families and their loved ones who also suffer as journalists go to the front line. Journalism has become one of the most dangerous professions in the world today. And this region has always been known for being difficult and dangerous for journalists. But it has been made into a killing field right now. Every day we hear more and more stories of journalists being killed in Gaza, in South Lebanon, journalists fleeing from other parts, being locked up, detained just not very far from here in the West Bank. And of course, in many other countries in this region too, it is a hard time for journalists. In Sudan, about 400 journalists have fled, and journalists in exile are not necessarily safer than they were at home because they are still pursued by threats and restrictions. What journalists are doing, particularly in the context of Gaza, is remarkable because in my own research and my report, and I have said this to the United Nations General Assembly, I have said it to member states who champion human rights and who are members of the Media Freedom Coalition, that we cannot remain silent. In Gaza, I have detected a clear pattern of killing of journalists, of threatening intimidation, of destroying equipment of journalists, and destroying also other facilities of journalists, banning Al Jazeera, restricting or refusing access to foreign media. All this by Israel shows a pattern that indicates that the intention actually is to obstruct reporting on war crimes. That in itself is a major violation of international human rights and humanitarian law. Journalists are civilians under international humanitarian law, but unlike other civilians, they cannot flee the fighting. They have to go towards the fighting. They have to be there in order to be able to report what is happening, in order to be able to capture on their cameras what is happening. To me, they are more than civilians, they're essential workers in humanitarian situations. And we in the international community have an obligation to strengthen international law, to protect them, and to end impunity by bringing those who commit such crimes against journalists to account. Only 1 out of 10 cases of journalists killed around the world, whether in war or peace, is ever investigated and brought to justice. And that situation has persisted for the past several decades. I think it is a blot. It is a blot on the international community and on all member states of the United Nations that more is not being done to investigate. In particular, I believe Gaza stands out now as a clear sign to us that if we don't have the courage to protect journalists who report on genocide, then we have totally failed them and have failed ourselves in upholding our commitment to international law. As I said, we, the United Nations independent experts, were the first to raise the danger signs of emerging genocide in Gaza several months ago. There are many more voices who are now joining us, and we must continue to push for an end to the fighting, to justice for the people, but also to journalists. And to you who are journalists here and in other places who are listening to us, I say, please keep on doing what you're doing. With all your resilience, with your commitment to truth, we cannot protect human rights, democratic values, or even humanity. And I would say that don't be disheartened. If you feel sometimes that you are alone out there, you are certainly not. And if you feel your voices are not being heard, that is also not true. There is growing support for justice for journalists and for others who are being killed. I am just coming from Germany, and there I saw young people, courageous young people, going out on the streets to protest about what is happening in Gaza. I have been to other countries in the world, to Ethiopia earlier this month, and there too I saw many people protesting. There is growing awareness that journalists are essential, fundamental for the protection of our democratic values and for human rights. Yes, there are countries where democracy is suppressed. Yes, there are countries where authoritarianism is rising, but so too are voices against them. And we have to keep those voices alive. And Gaza will be the real test for the future of whether we are able to call out impunity, the impunity that Israel has enjoyed, not just now, but for decades. I said that 9 out of 10 cases of killings around the world are not investigated in the context of the occupied Palestinian territories, whether it's Gaza, East Jerusalem, or West Bank. Not one single case has been investigated, properly prosecuted by Israel. And that is absolutely unacceptable, particularly given the level at which the killings are now taking place. So I congratulate ARIJ for keeping this issue so clearly on the table, for giving support to those who are fighting on the front lines, and for reminding us that journalism is not a crime. It is actually a public good, and it is based on fundamental human rights. And I want to end by repeating a slogan of one of the organizations on investigative journalists. Killing a journalist does not kill the story. The story will be told, and thank you for your bravery, your courage, and your resilience.